my name's Steve Sjogren, and I was involved in the Jesus movement at the kind of at the last third of it, I'd say. I mean, it's a pretty accurate way to say it. And I'd actually was not a believer. I'd read about it when I think Lonnie Frisbee was on the cover of Newsweek or Time, one of the two. And I don't know if you saw that or not, but that was my first exposure to the whole thing. And I thought, man, this is really interesting. Right after that, I remember reading it at the library in this little town in Arizona. I went to high school. And right after that, went to a Doobie Brothers concert down in Phoenix at Sun Devil Stadium, which is kind of ironic. And they sang that song. I know it sounds kind of corny, but Jesus is just right with me. And I had what I now would call a power encounter in the stands there. I remember it was as though electricity hit me from head to toe, back and forth several times. And I actually asked my friends who were with me, "Did you sense anything?" That's no. I think that God was doing something right then. And so it ends up that right after that, I got out of the blue a scholarship to go spend a year in Scandinavia. It could have been anywhere, but they stuck me with a family north of the Arctic Circle who were believers. And as a result of really being there, I really came to the Lord in personal faith, crossed into believing in Jesus. And strangely enough, somebody gave me a book in Norwegian all about the Jesus movement. They said, I feel like I should give this to you. It was out of the blue. I had no idea that I knew anything about it, that I had been exposed on the magazine and so forth. But ended up that I read about what was going on in Southern California, made a determination. I'm going to move to California when I get back to the States, and I'm going to go to the Southern California Jesus movement thing. And so I got involved that way. It was really kind of a reading about it first and then coming. And it turns out that a lot of the pictures in this, it was called, I think Jesus People is what they call it in English. And a lot of the people in the pictures were people I ended up meeting later. And of course, Chuck Smith, Pirates Cove, Baptisms Galore, Lonnie, Ken Gullickson, who was with Chuck to begin with, you know.
Well, you just listed off some really important people and places. So let's back up.
Yeah.
Let's back up first to. I mean, we could pick any one of those. Pirate Cove. We could pick Chuck Smith, but let's start at the top then with Chuck.
Yeah.
And so, when did you first see Chuck, and what were kind of that? Walk us through that first experience.
Yeah, you know, with Chuck, I've often thought that Calvary Chapel was a combination. It's my personal view. Chuck, the stability factor, the father figure, and Lonnie Frisbee, who was kind of the jet engine behind the whole thing with evangelism and so forth. But the first thing I was exposed to Chuck was actually on a tape. I heard him teaching on, I don't recall what it was even, but just had such a fatherly, kind of authoritative and a very positive way about him. I do my impression of Chuck Smith, and it's real simple. Open your Bibles to the book of Daniel. And, already I'm thinking this is going to be good because Chuck said it. And, but I never actually did more than just meet Chuck a couple of times, but he's in a class all by himself in my heart, you know.
And what was it about him that the stability thing? But and then you also talked about the Bible.
Yeah.
Well, talk about his Bible teaching. What was it that drew people in, separated it, made it distinct, appealing?
Yeah, I recall that Chuck was. This is in the '70s, early part of the '70s, very focused on end times prophecy, etc. And I'd never really, honestly, even though I was a new believer, I'd never really thought much about the end times. I recall being around that atmosphere and thinking, not just thinking, but convinced that we're right at the end of history. And not too long after that, I actually, a couple of years later, became a pastor, a low-level pastor in a large church. And I was so convinced it was the end of times that I voted out of the Social Security system as a pastor.
Was that common at the time amongst other Jews people?
It was. And looking back now, almost all of them regret it, of course, because here we are decades later, and it turns out it wasn't the end of time quite yet. And but I recall that there was such a swoop of people. When you're with a group of people and they're all enthused about something, it's easy to be enthusiastic, and it was an amazing time. Again, I think the positive peer pressure that was going on was super healthy. And it caused me to want to read Scripture more. It caused me to want to to pray more, to hang with other believers more, and so forth. So it was a great nursery, if you will.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, I'm
Sure.
trying to manage multiple things at the same time here, and I just want to focus on your response there, because I mean, then I want to get into the next piece, or before that part about the apocalyptic literature and about like kind of the end times piece. Mm-hmm. What was it that made you think that? Like what made you feel that eminence to take such drastic action? Was it Chuck's teaching? Was it the cultural turmoil of the time? What was the thing that was like driving that home?
It was desperate times. I would say that the Vietnam War situation created a vacuum, a spiritual vacuum, among young people in America. And I know there was in me, although I was not drafted, I had to register for the draft, of course, and that, just thinking about the gravity of it, I could end up going to Vietnam, who knows where in that part of the world, and getting shot, etc. I had two cousins that didn't come back from Vietnam, and they were older, of course, but I recall thinking, God, this is an unjust world. It is broken, broken, broken. And even before that, as a little kid, I recall, the idea of the nuclear bomb drills before your time, I'm sure, getting under your desk and waiting for the big bright light to come. And I'm thinking as a second grader, I don't think that's going to help a whole lot, getting under the desk. So in my mind, there was a lot of big fear things happening that were kind of deposited. And I'm not unusual. I was born at the peak of the boomer generation. And so I think that by and large, for me certainly, but I think across the whole generation, there's this combination of anger at the unjust war going on, the fear of not coming back. I know with Lonnie, getting back to Lonnie for a second here, that it was easy to do evangelism, Lonnie said, because he could go to the beach and pick out the guys that were probably going to go to Vietnam. And he had a spiritual sensitivity, and he was, I think, very gentle with that kind of thing. But, just the idea of people thinking my life is limited, my days are limited. It's a wake-up call.
So let's talk about Lonnie then. So you talked about Chuck a little bit, and you talked about how Lonnie was the fuel of the engine. So was Lonnie, when did you first meet Lonnie?
I met Lonnie I'd heard a lot about him. I met him in 1980. And you want to hear just a second about that whole thing? It was a closed meeting with John Wimber. He was the guy who really built the movement of the Vineyard. And Lonnie was one of about 12 people there for 3 days in a row. And we had long tables set up for whatever, just writing, sitting behind. Lonnie sitting next to me. I kind of nuzzled up to Lonnie. I wanted to hang out with this guy a little bit. I'd heard so much about. And the first day, he's wearing a complete, no kidding, outfit from a Green Beret. It has his name on it, even Frisbee. I'm thinking, that's probably getting a little close to crossing the line, wearing a uniform with your name on it. Were you a Green Beret? No. Why did you wear that today, Lonnie? I feel like God told me to wear this today. Okay. The next day, he shows up. He's wearing a complete head-to-toe priest outfit from the Vatican. The Vatican priests have these dozens of buttons and the shoes that button and so forth. So Lonnie, he has a hat. Okay. Lonnie, where'd you get that? At the Vatican, of course. Oh, you can buy it? Yes. Why did you wear that today? Because God told me to. Okay, I'll make it real quick. The third day, he shows up. He's wearing a cowboy outfit, complete with everything. Looks like Jeff Goldblum in the Buckaroo Banzai movie, if you happen to see that. He's got the hat on with it was hilarious. So don't tell me, Lonnie, God told you to wear that today. Lonnie was a guy who was prophetic to the point where it's difficult for most people to relate to. But he lived in a realm of God, what you're saying, what you're doing, I want to be involved in it. And all sorts of interesting things happened as a result of that. One time we're sitting in a Denny's restaurant. That was his favorite place for Lonnie. And it was kind of late at night, and we were talking. I was asking him questions about his background and so forth and so on. And the guy next to us at the table, he and his wife were eating pancakes at Denny's, I'm sure. And as we were talking, this guy began to, I now realize, manifest demonic issues right there on the spot. We're not praying for the guy. We're not talking to him. And the guy's back is arching. Is this get a little too far out there? And I could hear him deep breathing. His wife's going, honey, are you okay? And he goes, I don't know what's going on. I said, Lonnie, I think that guy, something's going on. He goes, should we pray for him? And he goes, I learned not to do that. He goes, what'll happen is the police will be here in about 3 minutes, and we haven't paid our bill yet. And I said, no kidding. He goes, he told me story after story. He says, where he's taken a risk to step out to do something that he felt like God was doing. And it sometimes backfired, but 90% of the time it went really well.
So you don't meet Lonnie until 1980.
Right.
But you develop a really close relationship with him. And enough that he's sharing.
Yeah.
So tell me pass on some Lonnie stories then.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that he told you about his time? You mean even going back up maybe into the Bay Area?
Yeah.
He really kind of hits the scene like a thunderbolt. Kent Philpott says of him, he wasn't anything special, and then he comes down to the Bay Area, or he comes down to LA and sees him speak and is just floored by it. And he's like, this isn't the same kid who left the Bay. So tell us some stories that Lonnie told you about his experiences in those early years.
Yeah.
Invite us into the kind of that time in his life. I don't want to push anything, but whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, he told me that he had pretty much been socially promoted in school all the way through, so that by the time he dropped out of high school, which I think was about in 10th grade, if I recall, that he pretty much couldn't read. He was functionally almost illiterate. And I've seen him do Bible studies numbers of times. He would not necessarily always read the text. He would have somebody else sometimes read it because it was difficult to read orally. And he certainly could read well at that point, but he wasn't, their confidence, what have you, to have other people read the text. But at age about 17, he went to San Francisco, got a job as in a sail sewing factory, perhaps you've heard, for sailboats. Worked there, I don't know how long, months anyway. Ended up coming to the Lord as a result of some people that worked there. He felt like he should start doing evangelism. So his version of it was hitchhiking up and down the 101 freeway and leading people to Christ. And then saying, well, in appreciation, could you get me a Denny's breakfast? Again, Denny's all over the place with Lonnie. And they would drop him off, then he'd get back on the freeway and let somebody else to the Lord. And in fact, that's really how he and Chuck connected together. I wasn't there, of course, but the lady who prophesied, 80-something-year-old lady in the Bible study at Chuck's house, this is going to be a major movement, all sorts of people, young people come to Christ and so forth. And like within a couple of days, somebody picked up Lonnie hitchhiking and said, you got to meet this guy at his Bible study, Chuck Smith. Brings him over. And Chuck said he was the original hippie. Now, I don't know if it was Chuck or Moish Rosen from Juice for Jesus. One of the two, I'll give them both credit. How's that? Said it was their first hippie. And a hippie is a Tarzan that looks like Jane and smells like Cheetah. All with great love, I'm sure, spoken those words. But Lonnie, again, I think that the key thing with Lonnie was he was so willing to do whatever he felt led to do. One day, he was living with his mom still in a trailer park somewhere in Orange County. And was really pretty much raised by his mom, from what I got from Lonnie. And anyway, he was reading in James about calling on the elders and they will anoint you with oil to be healed and so forth. And he remembered the little kid next door, Billy, had an infestation, really, is the best word I could think of, with hundreds of plantar's warts on both feet to the point where he couldn't really walk plainly. He was walking, gingerly on the sides of his feet, whatever. Lonnie says, that's not right. He should not be like that. So he thinks, I'm an elder. I'm 19 or whatever. And Johnny's or Billy's only 10. I must be his elder. That's what he thought. He goes in his mom's kitchen, gets a bottle of Crisco oil, and says, this is oil. I'll pray for Jimmy. Anyway, he goes out and prays for Jimmy, the kid next door at the trailer park, pours most of the bottle on top of him, goes all over his shirt, his pants. And anyway, his mother calls Lonnie shortly thereafter, screaming, "Lonnie, he's an idiot, he's crazy, da da da." And she's yelling at Lonnie. The next morning, wake up, and the mother calls again, says, she's hysterical. She says, we woke up this morning and my son's sheet is full of hundreds of plantar warts that fell off at night. That's, that's astounding, that a guy would be that open to taking a risk and being misunderstood, no doubt. But he did that over and over and over again. I was with Lonnie. He did Monday night meetings at the Foursquare Church of Long Beach, and had often a band come in and play, and then he would do ministry, pray for people, etc. Saw some amazing things happen. One guy comes in, and he's got some kind of a breathing problem. I don't know what it was, but he says, "Lonnie, could you?" It's going on at the moment. I don't know if it's asthma or what it was, but he says, "Could you pray for me?" And Lonnie says, "Sure, no problem." And the guy's sitting there kind of wheezing, and Lonnie goes the other direction. I thought, what's going on here? He takes about 2 steps. He turns around and he whacks the guy full strength in his chest. The guy falls down, and I'm thinking, he's killed the guy. Poor guy, poor Lonnie. He'll be misunderstood forever now. The guy's on the ground, not making a whole lot of commotion. He stands up. He says, "This is the first time I've breathed this clearly in years." And I'm sitting there going, this is kind of wild and crazy, Wild West stuff, but God blessed it over and over and over again.
So what you talked about the dynamic between Lonnie and Chuck,
mm-hmm.
And then there's a third person that enters in a little bit with Ken
mm-hmm.
Phillipson.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about, what did Ken bring to the table?
Mm-hmm.
You became friends later.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first meet Ken?
Yeah, I met Ken right after I came to the Lord. Like I said, I moved to the LA area just to be a part of the Jesus movement. I'd read about it. I was taken by it. And almost immediately, I had a job. I was going to college, actually, also at the time, as a teller in downtown LA. One of the other tellers had said she had come to a church that was this amazing place. So I have a biracial marriage. This is 70s, a little before biracial marriages were common. Anyway, she says, "I feel loved and accepted." I thought, is this like a Calvary Chapel Jesus movement thing or something? Well, it turns out it was a Vineyard. It was the very first beginnings with Ken Gullickson. It would have been 75, I guess. And as I came in, there were numbers of actors I recognized. One of them was the guy from the Eagles, Bernie Ledden, one of the original Eagles. And I'm from Wichita originally, and I'm looking, I'm going, you look a lot like Bernie Ledden from the Eagles. He goes, "I am, but it's LA. What do you expect?" But just an amazing number of single people, very Jewish at the beginning, and I think it stayed that way for years and years. It's the west side of LA is very Jewish, and most of them had never been to church before. It was astounding what was going on, just a people movement. And Ken, who had been the first assistant with Chuck Smith, just had a very gentle way about him, very loving, very, very much present. And you can tell if a person is there or not. And Ken would be the original be here now kind of a guy. And somehow these intuitive, right-brained, arty people in the entertainment industry totally related to Ken. And
so Chuck and Ken are very different in some ways, very similar in some ways. What was their similarities that drew Jesus people, these street people, the people that the rest of the world had kind of not really cared about? What did they have in common that really stuck out to the Jesus people that made them significant leaders?
Yeah. In terms of leaders, I think most of them were in the been there, done that category. I've been through a bunch. They would say it is real common almost to exaggerate your testimony during that time of, I was a whatever addict, and oh yeah, well that's nothing. I was, and you got to wonder if it's completely all exactly hyperbole maybe, but as I look back now, I realize that they had a lot in common in terms of their own difficult backgrounds. Secondly, they often came from broken families, and what I saw, which I didn't see it at first, but I recognize it now, is that a lot of the guys had no father, and they were looking for a surrogate father in Chuck, in Ken, in John Wimber, and John, for one, said, I appreciate the fact that you're looking for a surrogate father, but I can barely be the father of the kids that I've already got, much less be good at it for other people. And I think, probably to a degree, that's what Chuck and Lonnie were able to do, is that Chuck was a surrogate for Lonnie. And, really, what it comes back to is that they sensed the presence of the Lord in a huge way with Chuck and with Ken. And it wasn't a theological thing, and certainly that was all valid, but it wasn't, I'm looking for this kind of a church and that kind of a church. I'm looking for love. I'm looking for acceptance. I'm looking for somebody that can relate to my own brokenness. And Chuck had been through a lot of brokenness. He was a Foursquare pastor, perhaps you know that. He was in Prescott for a long time, Arizona, and I don't know what it was, but something happened with Chuck's wife, Kay. And I think it was really disturbing. This is the best I can tell from Chuck. Maybe Chuck Jr. could tell you about that more. But I know something in it was really damaging to Chuck. And I believe that was kind of the beginning of him moving away from professional ministry.
I want to talk about Lonnie a little bit more, but eventually I'm not ignoring the pirate the beach baptisms.
Pirates Cove.
Pirates Cove, and I want to get there. But before we move on, this is more of a touchier subject, so we can bypass it. We can do whatever. I don't want to push or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But with Lonnie, dealing with some of the issues that he had around sexuality, dealing with some of the issues that he had around temptation, and the battles that he fought and won, and battles that he fought and was left alone at other times. I know reading Roger Sachs's books that Lonnie felt isolated.
Yeah.
But you had a unique lens into Lonnie's reflections on that period, even as you weren't there with him. How do you think Lonnie dealt with a lot of those issues, and how do you reflect on that later, those times later in life?
Well, Lonnie was actually married at one point. You knew that, perhaps.
Yeah.
And he met his wife nude sunbathing at the beach. It's like, okay, whatever. And they ended up getting married. They ran one of the Jesus houses. I don't know how that worked out exactly, but Lonnie would openly talk after the fact that he said, I've been sexually broken. I'm coming out of a bisexual background, etc. He openly talked about it in public. And so later when it became, Lonnie's I'm going, he's been talking about that for years in public. It's not a big secret. And I don't know what came down in this whole thing, but he was engaged actually to a pretty good friend of Janie's and mine, who's a therapist, kind of has her act together, I believe. And she and Lonnie were probably engaged for probably 2 years, something like that. I don't know what the whole precipitating event to stop the whole thing, but I know with John Wimber that he did not know how to deal with the Lonnie thing other than say, we can't work together anymore, kaboom, end of conversation. John was very much that way with any kind of a sexual sin issue, what have you. There was no discussion, no negotiating. It's kind of like, well, it's been nice knowing you, but boom. And so Lonnie, I think, was very transparent, and I never heard him really grovel in his own, explaining his story. But I know that Lonnie was very much willing to say that he was a broken person. Lonnie's brother goes to, was at one of the Vineyard churches in Orange County, and he might be a good person to talk to too, if I could maybe touch you with that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him and all that. It's important because there's these two Lonnies, right?
Yeah.
There's the Lonnie that's the heroic Lonnie that, like you said, is the fuel of this move, and the real evangelistic heart.
Right.
There's maybe 3 or 4 people that were evangelistic powerhouses. I think like Arthur Blessed and Kent Philpott and Lonnie Frisbee, and probably forgetting Sammy Tippett might be another one down on the East Coast, and John Scott Ross and all that. But Lonnie also has this piece to him that he battled for so long that I think it's important to try to understand how the two coexisted
Mm.
Because if we only focus on one,
Right.
we lose a very complicated and nuanced picture of a very complicated and nuanced man.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not trying to pry or anything like that, but I mean, for somebody who's close to him, and I'm going to be talking to Roger as well, just trying to understand how he fought that battle for so long. Because he goes off to Vineyard and he works with Vineyard in like 75. But he's with Calvary Temple for 7 years. And he's married to Connie in 68, I believe. And fights this battle for 7 years before going to Vineyard. And I'm interested if you have any reflections on, from your time with him, on that 7 years working under Chuck and working at Calvary and fighting that tension.
Well, he left Calvary and went to Florida. You're aware of that, perhaps, with the so-called Fort Lauderdale Five. The word of I'm not sure what Kingdom Now people. I don't know what you call them exactly. But then came back and stumbled across the Vineyard thing. And part of that story was he'd been bugging John to speak, and John didn't know who Lonnie was from Man of the Moon, and he finally let him speak for. He says he could have 5 minutes at the end of the service on Mother's Day weekend. There's barely anybody here. John did services every Sunday night because he said not only do they need to hear what's going on, but you can take an offering on Sunday nights. John was a smart guy with offerings and so forth. But Lonnie, to understand Lonnie, I think you got to get the picture that he was very childlike, and I've seen him misunderstood. Sometimes I brought some guys from a Bible study I was with. He spoke at something or other up in the San Fernando Valley, of course, many years ago. And I remember him saying to those guys with me standing there, "You guys want to hang out?" And I talked to him later on at the Bible study. I said, "We spent the entire night with Lonnie." I said, "What did you do?" "We just talked and hung out at this hotel and got some hamburgers and came back." And I think that some people would feel like that was perhaps it looks bad, has a bad optic to it, but because these guys were quite a bit younger than Lonnie, and nothing happened, nothing weird, but they were kind of surprised that a guy who was like that was willing to spend time with regular old folks and so forth, and I think that Lonnie was just what you see is what you get with Lonnie, and I don't recall him ever really expressing to me anyway a lot of one way or the other about his sexual background, although I knew his story very well, But I think to understand Lonnie properly, you got to get the picture that he was probably at some level like a teenager where he's locked into his thinking, and I think he was not a professional. In my mind, he was not the way he approached things, not a professional ministry person, but as a guy who was I think that just a part-timer kind of guy, but he was full-time. He thought one way, but he was actually in a different situation. Does that make sense? Yeah. And yeah.
So hopping then onto, and I appreciate that, and I think you nuanced it well.
Yeah.
The Pirates Cove.
Yeah.
Larry Esker just meant that, sometimes as many as 500 people baptized in one day out. Were you? I know you came later. Did you get out to any of these baptisms at the beach?
I did not.
What were some of the stories that people told you about those beach baptisms?
That I heard all sorts of things about Chuck, that he would make fun of all the younger guys because they were saying how cold the water was. It's Orange County, California is very cold, 12 months a year really in the water, and so Chuck was up there. You guys are all wimps and blah blah, and one of my friends said he followed him over to the car. Chuck has under his clothes a wetsuit, and it's just hilarious, But there's so many, such a buzz and a vibe that I know some people are getting baptized without probably thinking it through very well. Sure, I'll get baptized. We actually met for a year at the beach in Santa Monica, the tail end of that whole thing. And for one entire year, did not rain during the service. Rained up till the beginning of it, stops, and then it starts again afterwards. It's kind of a cool thing. The last day of being there for a year, the lifeguard who had been there 52 weeks in a row gets baptized, comes to the Lord, etc. And so there was a buzz, certainly in Pirates Cove, etc. But I think it was sweeping all over the place.
And yeah, I'm just that's such an iconic picture, such an iconic scene of these beach baptisms. Any other places or events that really stuck out to you that, like you said, you came here to be part of the Jesus movement.
Yeah.
So in your mind, as a young kid showing up in Costa Mesa,
Yeah.
what was it that you thought you were signing up
for? I thought I was signing up to be an evangelist or some sort. I was so convinced that the end was near and that we should do anything and everything we can to get the message out that I had a pretty decent, fairly new Volkswagen Beetle, and I counted up at the end of my sticker phase, I would call it. I think I had 25 bumper stickers on a Volkswagen Beetle, and that was windows, bumpers, everything else. And I was absolutely convinced that no matter what it looked like, that I was being called to do something in terms of bringing people into the kingdom. And sure enough, that's what ended up happening in the end. But it wasn't with Calvary Chapel, certainly. But I was convinced that anybody and everybody, it's all hands on deck, because Jesus is coming back momentarily here. With the Calvary Jesus movement time, there was very commonly what they called not an altar call, but a afterglow. It would happen after the music thing was going on, after the Bible study, after the whatever. And what that was, in essence, was take a little break between the first part, 10, 15 minutes, and then we're going to pray for people. And it would always be kind of behind the stage, if you will, at Calvary in Costa Mesa. And I think that became kind of a tradition with a lot of Calvaries. And trying to make a distinction between what we do in public and what we do off to the side. And therein is really, it's bringing the Vineyard into the whole thing. That was John Wimber's desires, to not just believe and to practice the gifts of Spirit off to the side, but to do it in, he called it the front room. And I the Calvary scene at the time was such that, because Chuck, I think to a degree, certainly his background was Foursquare, so he believed in the power of the Spirit, the gifts of Spirit. But Chuck has had all sorts of stories about the abuses of the gifts, and one of them was, I've heard him talk about, was that every Sunday growing up in this Pentecostal church, that at a certain time in the service, just one lady behind, for some reason, sat behind him every week, and she would prophesy, and it would just go on and on. It was, kind of a, not nonsense, but nothing edifying really. It's one of those, you are my people because you're my people, I call you my people. If you're not my people, I would not call you my people. Because you are my people, I call you my people. That kind of craziness that people that are on the outside looking in might think, can there be any benefit to that kind of thing? And so I could see Chuck being a little wary of all the above, but still, certainly Chuck had a deep down conviction that the gifts of Spirit are for today, the power of the Spirit is for today, just in a way that expressed the way that's intelligible, I guess is what Chuck would say. And as far as that whole portion of the Jesus movement goes, I think that it actually had some bearing on what happened with John Wimber and the Vineyard movement, where John was trying to be a go-between between evangelicals and Pentecostals. And it's been called by some a third wave of the 20th century, the move of the Spirit. There was the original Azusa Street Pentecostal thing. Then there was the charismatic renewal that happened in the mid-century. And then toward the end of the century was the third wave. And today, here we are, it's hard to find people that are fully committed to what would have been the fundamentalist perspective on the power of the Spirit. And today, I think more and more people are really, I think, lining up with where the Jesus movement was back in the day. That it's not to diminish the moving of the Spirit, but at the same time not to make a show out of things. And I've seen Lonnie, getting back to Lonnie for a second, I've seen him speaking numbers of times where he would be disrupted by somebody in the middle of the meeting, either typically laughing too loud. It sounds odd. I know that some Pentecostal groups think that enormous laughter is the mark of the Spirit, and I certainly that's a whole different context there. But Lonnie would have to stop sometimes and say, "What I said was funny, but it wasn't that funny. So if you could please not keep on distracting me as I'm speaking." And so there was a matter of the Spirit moving, and then sometimes oddball things happening. I know Lonnie, as he told me, the coup de grace of him leaving Calvary with Chuck was that Chuck had warned him a time or two, I don't want any more power ministry stuff going on in public. If you want to do it off to the side, that's fine. Well, Lonnie agreed to that. Well, not long after that, Lonnie's doing a Bible study, and he says, this lady in the front row, he goes, I could not figure out why nobody else could see it. He said, but this lady was clearly casting some kind of a spell on me. And I'm saying, how do you tell it's a spell? Well, she's sitting there and she's like looking at me and making these weird eye movements and going like this. And everybody around here doesn't even notice her. He says, and somehow I'm supposed to not say anything. So he's doing the Bible study, stopped for a second. He goes, hold on, folks, 1 second. He prays for that lady for like 3 seconds. She manifests, from what I understand, demonic issues. And that was the end of it. And so there really was a need to be prayed for, but he violated what he told Chuck he would not do. Chuck said, that's it, So to get back to the original issue, as I see it, the Jesus movement has been a fantastic model. By and large, there's a few extremes here and there, but of kind of a middle of the road deal, again, between Pentecostalism and conservative evangelical thinking or fundamentalist thinking. I think it's been very much a gift to the church.
What do you think about its legacy of evangelism specifically? I mean, I think in our culture today, evangelism is a little bit more of a lost, you could call it many things, lost art, lost practice, bad word, many different things. But evangelism is such a driver, and especially your experience of it, of the Jesus movement. Do you think that we've lost that it wasn't ingrained enough, that it was too individualistic, good, bad? How do you think the legacy of its evangelistic focus has come into it?
Yeah. I think similar to the power of the Spirit, I think it became more tangible, there's more handles were put on it through the Jesus movement. It's more accessible. Now, the one thing I noticed about the Jesus movement is that it was very much influenced by evangelists. And my conviction, having seen that, and I think from Scripture too, is that the role of an evangelist is to raise the water level, the perception, the belief that something great is on the underway here, that God is moving, people are coming to Christ. And so when they're around, these evangelists, the Lonnies, the Tom Stipes, for example, some of the guys from the Jesus movement bands that were happening, Gentle Faith, Mustard Seed Faith, Winging of Prayer, I think I was in one of the groups, is that it became all evangelistic. And I think people began to have an anticipation. If I can just get there and bring friends, I know something will happen in their lives. And even today, I think a lot of Calvaries that are led by evangelists more than pastors, I think that they are doing amazing evangelism still. Is there room to grow? Absolutely. My sense is that seeds were planted that are growing, but there's a lot more to come. As I run into Gen X and Gen Z people today, they are hungry for the same thing that the Jesus movement produced back in the day. And they don't know exactly how to get there, but they're experimenting. I think in the minds of a lot of Gen Z, Gen X people, is that they don't want to be doing propagation as usual. They don't want to maintain or to preserve. They want to break the boundaries. Go for it.